Thank you for joining us on the Free Time Mastermind podcast, brought to you by the Free Time Mastermind Group. Today we have Advah Hanan, founder of Educators Consult LLC, and she is the host of her own podcast called Shaping Little Minds. Her experience in early childhood education helped her build a mentorship program for fellow educators. Teachers often experience burnout, and that doesn't have to be the case for them or for any of us. How can teachers stay rooted in the love of their profession? Let's find out more together. So you had 7 years as an early childhood educator. Can you take us through the education that you received for that first and then the transition into that career?
Yeah, so I actually started my teaching career with a degree in psychology. Um, I didn't know anything about teaching. I knew I wanted to be around kids. I knew I loved kids. I knew I wanted to be in the classroom, but I didn't know anything when it came to teaching. So I went in and I was a co-teacher for 3 years. The first year, um, I didn't really teach. I was scared. I didn't know how to lesson plan. I definitely didn't know, how to manage a classroom and what to do and whatever. The first year, I call it a failure, and not because it was something that I regret at all. It literally was the reason I pursued education and became a requested teacher the last few years I was there. Um, so I only taught my first lesson in April, and on the East Coast, we started in September. um, so I was a co-teacher for 3 years. I was teaching a second language. I didn't want to teach the second language anymore. I wanted to be the head teacher. I wanted to move up. Um, I ended up leaving the school, not because I had any problems with the school, but really because they just didn't have any opportunities for me. And ended up, which is funny, I ended up working at a school as a paraprofessional in one of the public schools here, a very good public school here. And I loved it, but they also, at the end of the year, didn't really have anything. But I got a call from the school that I was working at saying, "We have a head teacher position. Are you interested?" At the time, after that first year of teaching, I went back to school. So by that time, I had already I was already halfway through a master's. I got another bachelor's degree in early childhood education. And then I got a master's in education with specializations in special education and educational leadership. Um, my goal was to be in the classroom and then potentially do administration. Um, so I went back to the classroom for another 3 years. Those were the 3 years where I learned everything that I teach now to teachers, which is, having that work-life balance, being able to make the most of your time in the classroom, um, getting to that point where you can say, okay, you can see that families are requesting you for their children. I had families requesting me that I didn't even know. They just had heard about me and they wanted their child in my classroom.
And did that shift in mastery come from, in other words, where you were um, professional wise to where you became? Was that because of a mentor, or was that due to the additional college education, or was it just because of the experience in the classroom? You started to see patterns and start to build a
So
strategy.
I would say it was a mix of going back to school, and learning by watching and observing. I was able to take the things that I was learning at school and implement them and see what works, what didn't work. But I also worked with a community of teachers who are unbelievable, and um, most of them have been in the classroom for 10 plus years. So I was able to also gain perspective from them.
What do you think the difference is between what you had to offer that put you in an in-demand situation from what the average, of course, teachers work very, very hard, and I don't want to take anything away from the ones that go in and do their job every day.
Mhm.
But what set you apart? What do you think made you more in demand than the others? What were you providing that they could clearly see was an added benefit?
I honestly think that my classroom management with these kids was pretty good. I had them sitting for circle time. I had them sitting at tables for lunch. Obviously, there was always something that was happening in the classroom because it doesn't matter what age you teach, there's always something. I also think my approach was different. My approach was very much like what the school's philosophy is, which very much aligns with mine. So, it was very play-based. It was, I figured out what my kids needed in order to thrive in the classroom. Like whenever a kid, last year I did a coverage for maternity leave. This will kind of highlight what I'm talking about. That coverage was the hardest coverage I've ever done in my life. I've subbed, I've worked full time in the classroom. Never have I ever had such a hard time in the classroom because of specific boys in the classroom that had their own set of issues, but were also bad for each other. It was just a bad combination, a lot of new kids in that classroom. And something that I noticed with these kids, and they were 3 and 4, is they needed a lot of sensory input, a lot of sensory input. So every single morning and every single time I had something go out in the classroom for them to play with, it was a play-based school, so we played a lot, and we learned through play. Anything that would give them that sensory input, I would always put at least one thing out for them because it calms them. So something like that is what I think stood out to a lot of people because I would see what was happening in the classroom and then say, okay, this is what needs to happen. And honestly, it's what I still do with my clients. They tell me what's going on in the classroom, especially like in early childhood. I had a client who's an early childhood teacher, and something that I noticed in her classroom was that they were putting out mostly the same kind of toys. So they were putting out like building toys. And that's wonderful, but kids are going to get bored. They're not putting out manipulatives. They're not putting out sensory input stuff. They're not putting out art. So there was no, it wasn't fun for the kids. And within 10 minutes, the kids were throwing toys around the room. Why? They were bored. So I think that was one thing. I don't actually know exactly what it was that people pinpointed, but I also had a really good relationship with the families. That was I think pretty key in my experience. I had really, really good relationships with all of the families that I worked with. And even now, when I go back to visit, these families say hi, they give me a hug, the kids say hi. It's not, it was different than a lot of teachers experience because I had those relationships.
Well, it sounds like you have a much more, you took the time. So what I was hearing through all of that is you actually took the time to understand what the individual needs of each child was, which is very labor intensive, but of course it pays off in the long run because you guys have almost a year together. So for people that are not as well versed in education, can you fill us in on the age range for early childhood? What's considered that in the field? And also, you mentioned paraprofessional earlier, and I thought I better make sure we clarify because not everybody might know that. So I always look for
Yeah.
acronyms and things that we can help, give a little bit more background.
So early childhood is preschool through second, depending on the state. Sometimes it's third. I worked for most of my career with 2 and 3-year-olds. A paraprofessional is like an aide in the classroom, someone who's helping the teacher with children who have some sort of disability. So they have an IEP or a 504, both of which are individualized education plans for kids to help them succeed in the classroom. So when I was a paraprofessional, I was actually in the grades. I was in 4th grade. And I worked with a child one-on-one. In his IEP, he needed it. He was on the spectrum. but very high functioning. So I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, no, that's great. I knew what you meant. I just want to make sure everybody else was, could enjoy the conversation as well. So when you had that one-on-one, you eventually transitioned to do more one-on-one, where you started to do some early intervention. Can you tell us what early intervention is, what it involves, and how you transition from the classroom to that more one-on-one type environment?
Yeah. So early intervention, it helps children 0 to 3 who have developmental delays. It could be speech related. It could be a physical delay, motor skills, gross motor skills, fine motor skills, whatever it looks like. And basically you work one-on-one with a child. And when they evaluate the child, they determine how many times a week you work with that child. So so to give you the backstory as to how I got this job, it actually landed in my lap. I didn't go looking for it. I was looking for a part-time job. I was when I left teaching, I went into administration for a very short time. I did not like it. I also wasn't doing the job that I was hired to do. So I left and I wanted to pursue my business. And at the time, it wasn't making any money. And I was in like La La Land thinking that it was going to like all of a sudden start. um, so I started also looking for a part-time job and I wasn't getting anything. I was applying, I was, emailing, I was doing LinkedIn, I was literally doing everything. Because I wanted a part-time job so that I could, sustain my life, but also work on my business. And randomly towards like April of 23, I get a message from someone saying, "We're looking for therapists. Would you be interested in doing early intervention?" And I emailed her back. I said, "Absolutely." She called me on the spot, gave me the job. Um, so I had to go through a lot of like paperwork because they have to make sure that, there are no records. And they also ask for a lot of just records in general and a lot of paperwork to process because it's an agency that works through the state. So I get paid via the state of New Jersey. Um, and I transitioned into that role in August of 2023 and have been working actually with the same kids since August. I have 4 cases, each of them more than once a week. So I see 2 of them 3 times a week and 2 of them twice a week.
And without getting into specifics of their cases, is it mostly are they more genetic issues or is it more environmental? Mm.
It's a mix. I have a lot of two two language households.
Oh,
So that can also get very confusing for kids at that age. Um, and that's not to say that nobody should do that because actually at that age is the perfect time to introduce other languages if you want to speak it in your household. Um, but a lot of times that can get mixed up in their head. Like they'll understand everything in all the languages you're speaking. It's just they won't be able to necessarily verbalize it. So I see a lot of that. I do have a child who was just diagnosed on the spectrum, but I knew that. I knew within about a month of working with this kid. And I called the agency and I said, "This kid is on the spectrum, no question." But mom was very aware, and took the steps to get him evaluated in the first place.
fantastic.
Um, so I know in that family, they do have at least one other child who was diagnosed on the spectrum. Um, so I don't really know much about that other child, but I was able to see a lot of that within a month of working with him. The others are mostly speech delays, and the others also are mostly have a dual language household.
That's interesting. I never would have in a million years thought that that might be a challenge. You know, I wish I had been in a two language household because, I realize now through traveling, having that second language or maybe third language, oh wow, the doors that it opens up is amazing. But from a
Yeah.
developmental standpoint, I had no idea that it would present itself as a challenge. And yeah, so that's fascinating. I always thought it was, all upside and no downside, but obviously it does present some challenges as well.
Yeah, it can get mixed up. And honestly, if the kid does have a developmental disability, it also can affect the child. So I speak two languages. I was brought up in a dual household. And the other language that I speak, I am not as fluent as I used to be because I don't speak it very often. I hear it all the time from my family because it's not like a language you hear in this country very often. And so I hear it all the time. I watch the news in that language, but I don't speak it as much. So my speaking abilities aren't half as strong as my speaking abilities in English.
When you're dealing with kids of that earlier age,
Mhm.
they have a very high level of what called neuroplasticity. So in other words, they have their mind is more like clay that can be easily molded. Whereas
Yes.
that's why people who are, let's say, over 30 or over 40 struggle to pick up a second language, or they struggle to learn something completely new.
Yeah, so I think for most teachers believe that in learning alongside their students. So when it becomes as important as it was, at least to me, to learn and to keep growing as a teacher, um, it becomes easier for teachers to, okay, take the information and try to implement. And a lot of times, especially with newer teachers, um, taking the information and implementing when it doesn't work, they get frustrated and they drop it. So and sometimes, you take the information and then you don't know how to implement. So I think the learning can go so far. Um, I think it can be more challenging to try to implement it as a teacher. I I don't know in terms of like neuroplasticity. I think we all have, some neuroplasticity, and I think we all have the ability to, take things and learn. It's just a matter of how much you put into that learning. And depending on the teacher, every teacher is different. Some teachers prioritize that learning and some teachers don't. So I know that, like, in a public school setting, they have a certain number of hours of professional development that they have to do. Usually it's like 20 hours for the year. Um, Sometimes teachers take that very seriously and they'll spread out those 20 hours during the year, so that they can learn and also implement and ask questions if they have any questions. And then there are some teachers who don't take that seriously and kind of wait until the last minute to do it all, don't end up implementing much, and they don't really see much of a difference. So it depends. I feel like every teacher is different. The teachers that I happen to work with are the teachers who want to learn and want to grow and want to be the best teachers they can be.
And I know you don't deal with people that are in college thinking about being educators, but thinking about those people for a moment, because almost with any career, and I've known a lot of people that went into the medical field and they spent all of these years in education. And then when they got into the field, day one on the job, it wasn't anything like they expected. And that, unfortunately, that's a terrible time to find out after you've just invested 4 to 6 years of your life. And now sometimes if people are working full time, going to school part time, they might take 8 years to complete that professional degree, and then they get into the field and it's not what they expect, which I find very strange that somebody would invest that much time really not knowing what the end product would be. But in those cases, if someone out there is considering being an educator, is there a book they should read first to help them make that decision before they take the leap? Is there a mentor? Is there a YouTube, somebody out there that definitely you should read or watch this before you make that leap so you know what you're getting into?
Unfortunately, that doesn't really exist.
Wow.
Um, there are definitely books out there about teaching. There are books about, you know, how to teach reading as a first year teacher, anything you need to expect as a new teacher. But unfortunately, nobody really talks about that transition from college into the classroom. That's something that I'm working on actually at the moment. I recently announced that I was starting to write a book, and that book would be a resource exactly for those teachers,
Oh,
the
wow.
college
Fantastic.
students who are going into education and want to go into the classroom, but need that support in transitioning. Because unfortunately, this is all too common where first year teachers are like, this isn't not what I want. This is not what I expected. This is not at all what I thought it was going to be. And a lot of them give up after a year or two and they leave the profession altogether. So one of my goals is actually to go and speak to upcoming teachers at their colleges, and give them the tactics that they need. What I always say to new teachers who are going into the classroom for the first time is find a mentor, whether that's through your school or outside of the school. Find a mentor, someone who can guide you, take you through those steps, and help you get prepared without overworking and without burnout.
That makes sense. And you mentioned you're launching your business before and working part-time. Tell us the name of the business and back us up a little bit to what made you think about starting it and what made you ultimately decide to go ahead and take, because starting all businesses are a risk. So what made you decide to take the plunge?
Yeah. So my business is called Educators Consult, technically. But basically what happened is in my fifth year of teaching, I had come back as a lead teacher in the school after being a paraprofessional for a year. And I had a very smooth transition because I knew what was expected. I also knew the school very well. I knew the teachers. And I had enough time and enough knowledge to be able to do what I needed to do in the classroom. There was another teacher across the hall from me who was teaching as a lead teacher for the first time. She was an assistant before, and she came in frazzled. Um, there was a lot going on at home as well. So between the two, it was just not it was not like a great experience. And what ended up happening is she didn't meet those expectations. Parents were complaining, the other teachers in the classroom were complaining. You know, the director of the early childhood in that school doesn't usually ask for lesson plans. She doesn't believe that teachers need to be giving in their lesson plans as long as they're doing their job. But when they're not doing their job, she asks for lesson plans. And mid-year, she asked for lesson plans with that teacher. And I knew it was only going to go downhill from there. And I tried to help as much as I could, but I was also still on a learning curve. And I was also dealing with my kids and being, a first year lead teacher, trying to come up with fun projects and fun whatever. And so come, I want to say March or April, this teacher was told she wasn't asked back. Um, and that kind of set me in this spiral where I was like, okay, she could have been asked back had she gotten the mentorship she needed. She could have been asked back if someone had taken the time to sit with her once a week. She like, and this is very common in every school. It has nothing to do with the school, that school itself, where new teachers aren't really mentored. They're not really guided. And they're expected to flourish in the classroom as if like nothing's happening. And so I got I caught on this mission of finding ways to support teachers so that that doesn't happen, so that they can meet expectations and so that they can feel like they're flourishing in the classroom, um, and so that they can feel like they can navigate whatever comes their way.
So tell us a little bit about the services that you're offering to these teachers. Like, in other words, the type of service and how it's currently delivered.
Right now, I am currently offering one-on-one coaching, one-on-one mentorship for teachers. I have a 3-month option and a 6-month option. Um, Knowing teachers, I also have payment plan options so that it's more affordable for them. And basically, what happens inside of one-on-one coaching is it is super individualized to that teacher. So I don't make up plans for the calls that we get on. I don't make up a full curriculum that we go through. Um, in the 6-month program, we go through phases, and that is not like it's not concrete. So I always like to, have the teacher come to me with any issues that they're seeing and have us work through it together. And that's what our calls are all about. So in the 3-month program, you have 12 weeks of calls, one call a week, and you get messaging access. Um, there's a curriculum that I have in a portal. It's like a digital course that they can go through at any time. And they also get classroom reviews and like classroom work review feedback, um, and really any support that they need. Like it's really just for them, with them in mind. Um, I created the portal, the curriculum based on what I had been seeing teachers struggle with. So they can dive into that. There are also other PDF documents in there as well that they can use. In the 6-month program, the the um, the overall like calls are a little different. It's 3 weeks of calls in a month and then 1 week of implementation. And because we have 6 months, I decided that having that 1 week of implementation could be really, really beneficial. It's not like we're not talking through this week, like we just might not have a call. We will implement and they can ask questions. They can, tell me how it went. They can get coached via this messaging app. Um, that's really like the the place for it. And then everything else is the same with as the 3-month. It's just a longer period of time. So those are the two ways right now to work with me. I am working on other things
And
behind this.
it's probably what you're offering now, I would assume, is slightly different than what you had imagined when you started. Just like when a teacher gets in, they have this expectation and that it gets different. So I'm sure when you initially launched it, so this is what you're offering now, but when you started, it was probably a somewhat different vision of what you were going to offer. And then when you started to interact with clients, you realized, wait a minute, I need to pivot. Can you give us a little bit of details about maybe what it was on day one versus where it is now? Because that's
Yeah,
great. People love to know that learning process.
yeah. So I actually started off with a blog. I would write a blog about things that were happening in the classroom with me as a teacher. Um, I don't even know if I still have that blog, in all honesty. But it started off as a blog because I was seeing things in the classroom that I either didn't like or didn't agree with, and I wanted to talk about it. And that was my way of talking about it. But at the beginning, when I wanted this business in the first place, I was really, really scared of what the school would say if I went out and did my own thing. So I did the blogging for a while. It was okay. But I then kind of went off into a potential membership and then into a potential course. And honestly, all of those things are great and wonderful, but it didn't feel like the right offer ever. for me. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, I have like really dived deep into my one-on-one and making it a really great experience for the teachers who come in.
So you're providing that highly customized experience with them, like you did with the kids in the very beginning. So I see that thread throughout your, and to be fair with a lot of other people, they go to these various membership platforms. You could get lost in all of the different companies that would gladly take your money on a subscription basis. You have
Yep.
Kajabi, you have we're the backbone of our site is based on Go High Level, because we weren't going to be as curriculum based for the same
Right.
reasons, like you said. We want group meetings, and people can pair off on their own
Right.
one-on-one when they see strengths in the group. We didn't want to have people go through a bunch of courses, because I don't want to go through a bunch of courses. I mean, if it fixes a very specific problem in a very short period of time, sure. But creating courses, I can't provide something that I wouldn't go through myself. It has to be something I can be proud of and stand next to and put my name on it. But
Yeah.
but it works for other people. You look at Anthony Robbins, who's puts products out there, and you never see him, you'll never talk to him, but he gets a lot of people to pay money for these courses that they go
Yeah.
through, and they never interact with another person. Um, there's also another comparison between you in the classroom versus what you're doing now. The kids, sometimes when they have issues, and that's environmental, and of course you have a very limited, you have them in the classroom so you can influence them during that time that you have them. But what happens in that other environment that they go into, you have very little influence over. Same thing with teachers. How do you, when you're helping someone,
Mm-hmm.
you can obviously get into the technicals of what needs to happen in their classroom and how they can be more organized. But some of those people are really just struggling with, when they go home, there's environmental issues there. So how do you either deal with it, or kind of separate those two parts of the problem?
So what I have found over the last few years is that when the classroom feels manageable, when the classroom feels organized, and like things are running somewhat smoothly, obviously it's not going to be perfect, and I have to remind the teachers all the time that it's not going to be perfect. When things feel calm in the classroom, it ends up feeling calm at home too. So when you feel chaotic at work, you're going to bring that chaos home with you. And my most recent client, um, who I just finished with and is probably signing on again in the next month or so, um, she was bringing chaos home with her.
Oh,
And she wasn't making time for her husband. She wasn't making time for her kids. She was always working. She was up at like 3 o'clock in the morning working. And something that literally from day one when we started working was, how do we manage time at school? How do we make sure that you are prioritizing what you need to prioritize and doing the tasks that you need to do? And what boundaries are we setting so that that chaos doesn't come home? And within 3 weeks, things had already started to shift. Over weekends, she was going out with her husband. She was going to her kids' soccer games. She was not up until 3 o'clock in the morning. She was doing work at work. And if she had to bring anything home, she would, take the time in the afternoon, evening to be with her husband, to be with her kid, and then give herself a time limit at the end of the day. So I think a lot of times what happens in the classroom ends up affecting the teachers at home. And I know that for a fact because I was that person. I would come home from a really hard day, and I would be in a bad mood. And something that I teach inside of coaching is how to create that new energy when you go home, even after a hard day, and how to decompress from that hard day so that you're not bringing all that chaos and upset home with you.
I may need to sign up. I'm like, wow, that's great, because I'm on this assignment where temporarily I'm on these, I'm working 60 hours a week. So
Yeah.
it's when in that situation, there's virtually no life balance. But I like the keeping everything at work, and then the home environment is different. And when the pandemic occurred, I was working in an office environment at the time,
Hmm.
and we were all told to go home, which was funny because people had asked to work from home before the pandemic, and the company was like, "There's no way," and they listed all of these reasons, but then all of a sudden they immediately started trying to shove us out of the office, and I resisted it. I'm not going to say I got in trouble, but it did go up through management pretty high levels because I just continued coming to the office. Everybody else was gone, and I just kept coming in. That's my style. I was doing my job. I was working hard. They were very happy. And then my manager's manager happened to walk by my cubicle, and her eyes, she said, "What are you doing here?" And everybody had been gone for like a month. And I just kept coming. And I said, home is sacred to me. I'm not bringing this stuff home. I was doing fraud investigation at the time. A lot of people know I was involved in that, which is really intense. And, everybody's lying to you, and you're trying to get to the truth and trying to figure out if you're dealing with a criminal or not. So it's extremely intense. And I couldn't imagine. And I said, home is sacred. It's like a temple. It's quiet, it's quiet. If there's music, I want, it's because I want music, but otherwise it's an extremely peaceful place so that I can immediately leave work and then just decompress. It was visually appealing and just peaceful.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't imagine bringing that work computer home. It was outside of um, my ability to even consider it. But
Yeah.
after that meeting with my boss's boss, she said, if you want to continue working here, you're going to pick that computer up and take it home, which I did. And I dealt with it, but I still didn't like it because I didn't really feel like there was a really great boundary between home. Some people loved working from home, and I
Yeah.
get it. And it did end up getting easier. But wow, when you go somewhere, it's like I can work out at home. I can walk around the neighborhood with weights in my hand and a weighted backpack,
Yeah.
which sometimes I do. But when you go to the gym, when you're going to some other place, there's something magical about changing environments. And you're like, okay, I'm in here. I'm going to get on this elliptical for, 45 minutes,
Change of
whatever.
space. Yeah.
Totally
I
different than
mean,
having it liberty.
I work from home half the time, and I also I need to get out sometimes. So I go to a cafe, or I go to Barnes and Noble. Yeah. I mean, I was telling a friend of mine, working from home is kind of overrated because it can be really, really difficult to navigate. During the pandemic, teachers were at home, and I know that a lot of teachers struggled with the lack of boundary. Um, I used to get messages from parents at 7 p.m. I didn't answer them, but I got them. And something that I had to figure out was, what are my boundaries, and when am I going to cut work off and say, okay, I'm done. These are my hours, I'm done. Because as you've probably heard, teachers are expected to work outside of contracted hours with no pay, no extra pay, no nothing. My biggest thing is that is so false. There is a way to do it. It just takes work. So the pandemic, I feel like, yeah, knocked everybody upside down. Nobody knew what to do with it.
I would assume you're mostly dealing with the public school system. Is that correct?
Actually, most of my clients have been private school
Oh,
teachers,
I see.
which
I
is
see.
interesting. I had one who was public school. Um, most of the teachers that I've been working with is private school. I know the private school world very well. I worked in the private school sector for a long time. So, I mean, it's different in every state, every location, every school is different. But I know the basics of the public school world as well. Um, and I worked in public school for a little bit. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference in the sense of every school has their own curriculum, private, public, it doesn't really matter. Every school has their own set of expectations. It changes from school to school, from district to district. So I try to, get an understanding of what those expectations are and what that curriculum looks like from the teacher so that I can, help them navigate moving forward. But a lot of times the things that I'm working on with these teachers are very general things. So one teacher was struggling with behaviors in the classroom. So I was helping her with behaviors and classroom management. I was helping her with, figuring out that work-life balance. Another teacher who worked for the public school system was struggling with all the things that she needed to do to get ready for a first year of teaching. So we were working on procedures and routines and expectations for the kids and expectations for herself and how to balance everything. So that was, again, super general to the teaching world, but also like to anybody navigating a full-time job, right? And then this another teacher um, was struggling with work-life balance and figuring out how to get everything done in her workday and, shorten the time she was working on lesson plans and the work that comes along with that, and creating a life for herself at home outside of the classroom. So it's I feel like it's very general. It's not usually curriculum based, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I was wondering, is it universal that that teachers are expected to work outside of, let's say it this way, paid hours, both in the public and the private school system? Because I think I was under the misconception that the private school system had a little bit more capitalistic view towards respecting someone's time and understanding the value of that, but maybe I was wrong.
I think it depends on the school.
Okay.
Um, the school that I worked for, they didn't necessarily push the agenda, but they also they did have high expectations. And if you weren't getting your work done at school, the expectation was you were getting your work done at home.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I think most schools are like that. There are schools. It all depends on the administration, in all honesty, because it's top down. So if the administration believes that teachers should have a life outside of the classroom, they will push that agenda and they will do everything in their power to help their teachers manage the work, right? And get the support that they need. And then there are administrators who don't believe that and who believe that their teachers should be working outside of the classroom. And honestly, I don't know about outside of the US, but that's societal norm. It's normal for teachers to be expected to work outside of the classroom. It's funny because I saw on a Facebook group that I'm a part of, someone was saying that their administrator expected them to work outside of the classroom and was asking them what they were doing at home,
Oh,
which I've never heard of before, but that did happen. And someone commented on that post and said, yeah, well, you have to do that to be a better teacher. And again, societal norm, which
yeah.
is hustle, hustle, hustle. And that comes into play when it comes to teachers.
Incredible. Now,
Yeah.
your site, can you give us all the different ways they can find you? Is it just your main website? And can you give us the URL and all the other ways they can find you?
So I don't have an official website. It's on Kajabi, the website,
Good
and
job.
honestly,
Okay.
I probably need to update it. Um, but the best way to find me is honestly on Instagram.
Instagram. Okay.
I am at Coach for Teachers. Super easy.
That's a good one.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. You can find me there, or I do have a podcast. It's called Shaping Little Minds. It's on Spotify, Apple. I think it's on iHeartRadio also. Um, and I do weekly podcast episodes. They're short, sweet, to the point, all about education. I do have a lot of guests on as well, so we do a whole range of stuff on there. Those are like the two big places to really find me at this
Okay.
point.
And in wrapping up, where are most people discovering you and reaching out to you for your service? In other words, I know it's not technically, it is marketing in a way, but what outlet seems to be working the best for you? Where somebody says, I saw you on this, or I saw you on this. Where's the pipeline, most of it, for the leads?
Most of it comes from Facebook groups. I am,
Facebook groups.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are people on Instagram as well. Like, don't get me wrong, that is a hub, but I'm a big contributor in specific Facebook groups for educators. And I give insight. And a lot of times, what I'll say is at the end of it, because I know in this specific group, I'm allowed to pitch in the comments. I'm just not allowed to pitch like as a post. A lot of these groups have a lot of rules. So I'll say, like, if you need any further support, you can message me and we can chat. And a lot of times they will end up messaging me and asking for that support. So yeah, that's a lot of times where a lot of my clients come from.
That's interesting. So not the even though the podcast is good, and that's interesting, Facebook groups. Yeah, because we as you probably saw, we have a mastermind Facebook group, but I also do that. I've just started and there's a very small number of people in it, like the podcast matchmaking, to put the guests and the hosts together. And why I wanted to do that. And there's some great groups out there that have 10,000 people in it. But the problem is it's not curated, and a lot of spam, and there's a lot of people that just want to get people in some kind of crypto or Forex scam. So one reason why this group is so small, I threw 5 people out, I think 2 or 3 days ago, because I looked at their Facebook page. They're vetted. I want this group to be vetted. So I'd rather have a small group of high quality guests and hosts than some free for all. Like, all due respect to the other groups, but there's some fruitcakes in the comments section. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Free Time Mastermind podcast. As we learned, being organized, having a structured plan, and being responsive to individual needs are crucial to educators. It's also a great practice in general. We discovered seeking mentorship and being plugged into a supportive network are keys to growth, both personally and professionally. Like, subscribe, and share to show your support. And if you're an entrepreneur, go to www.freetimemastermind.com to discover the benefits of membership.